ASMR History channel. My name is Sophie, and today we embark on a soothing journey through the tumultuous wars of Scottish independence. Close your eyes, relax, and let the gentle sound of my voice transport you back to the late 13th and early 14th centuries, where brave Scots fought fiercely to reclaim their freedom from English rule. From the legendary battles of Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn to the iconic figures of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, we'll explore the rich tapestry of history that shaped Scotland's path to independence. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's begin our tranquil exploration of this remarkable period in Scottish history. The Scottish Wars of Independence were a significant series of military conflicts that took place between Scotland and England during the late 13th and early 14th centuries, playing a crucial role in shaping the course of Scottish history. The conflict was ignited in 1296 when Edward III of England invaded Scotland in an attempt to exert control over the country, leading to a widespread uprising among the Scottish population. This turbulent period saw the emergence of notable Scottish leaders such as William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, who played key roles in the struggle for independence. William Wallace's momentous victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge demonstrated the fierce resistance of the Scottish forces against English aggression. However, the subsequent defeat at the Battle of Falkirk highlighted the challenges and setbacks faced by the Scottish fighters in their quest for freedom. It was Robert the Bruce's exceptional leadership and the decisive triumph at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 that ultimately turned the tide in favour of Scotland. The Battle of Bannockburn was a remarkable feat, with a smaller Scottish army outmanoeuvring and defeating a larger, more heavily armed English force, solidifying Scotland's claim to independence. The conflict persisted intermittently until 1328, when the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton was signed, formally recognising Scotland's sovereignty and confirming Robert the Bruce as the legitimate king. This pivotal moment in history marked the end of the Scottish Wars of Independence and established Scotland as an independent nation. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the passing of King Alexander III of Scotland in 1286, which left his 3-year-old granddaughter, the Maid of Norway, Margaret, as his sole heir. Plans for her strategic union with Edward of Carnarvon, the son of King Edward I of England, were detailed in the Treaty of Berkham in 1290. This treaty emphasised the importance of maintaining Scottish autonomy even after the marriage, ensuring that Scotland remained a distinct realm with its own laws and freedoms intact. However, the sudden and tragic death of Margaret in the Orkney Islands later that year threw the realm into a succession crisis as 13 claimants emerged to vie for the Scottish throne. Among the primary contenders were Robert de Bruce, the 5th Lord of Annandale, and John Balliol, the Lord of Galloway. Fearing internal strife and the potential for civil war, the Guardians of Scotland sought Edward's intervention to arbitrate the dispute. Edward I, seizing the opportunity, asserted himself as the Lord Paramount of Scotland, demanding overarching authority over the Scottish realm in exchange for his arbitration. This move exacerbated tensions in the region, as many Scots resented Edward's attempts to assert dominance over their kingdom. The conflict, known as the Great Cause, unfolded between May and August of 1291, with 13 gatherings held in Berwick, where the claimants presented their cases before King Edward III of England, acting as the Lord Paramount. The deliberations during these gatherings were intense and contentious, as each claimant sought to prove their legitimate right to the Scottish crown. The debate debates and negotiations dragged on, fueling further animosity and distrust among the factions involved. Overall, the events following the passing of King Alexander III and the subsequent succession crisis involving the Maid of Norway's death set the stage for a complex and protracted conflict known as the Great Cause. The involvement of multiple claimants, Edward I's power plays, and the debates over the Scottish crown all contributed to the escalating tensions and uncertainties that plagued the region during this tumultuous period. The competition to determine the rightful heir to the Scottish throne eventually boiled down to 4 claimants who could directly link their ancestry to David I, John Balliol, Robert de Bruce, John de Hastings, and Floriswalf of Holland. This selection process was meticulously overseen by King Edward III of England, who wielded significant influence in the arbitration proceedings. In a move to settle the dispute, Edward instructed Balliol and Bruce to each nominate 40 arbitrators, while he personally handpicked 24 individuals to serve as adjudicators. This demonstrated Edward's firm grip on the process, as he issued a formal decree on August 12, 1291, mandating the collection of all relevant documents pertaining to the claimant's assertions and his own claim of suzerainty over Scotland. After months of deliberation, John Balliol emerged victorious and was declared king by a majority of the arbitrators. His coronation took place on November 30th, 1292, in a grand ceremony at Scone Abbey. However, Balliol's reign encountered immediate challenges when, on December 26th, he made the controversial decision to pledge allegiance to Edward III at Newcastle, effectively acknowledging Scotland as a vassal state of England. This move sparked outrage and discontent among the Scottish populace, deepening the animosity between the two nations. Tensions escalated further in 1294, when Edward I demanded military support from Balliol for his campaign in France. Faced with a critical decision, Balliol defied Edward's demands after careful consultation with his council. In response, a Scottish Parliament convened a war council towards the end of 1294, initiating diplomatic efforts to form alliances against England. Envoys were dispatched to France to negotiate the Old Alliance, a significant pact forged with King Philip IV of France. This alliance solidified mutual assistance between Scotland and France in their shared conflict against England, marking a pivotal moment in the shifting dynamics of power and allegiance in medieval Europe. The strategic alliance between Barlow and Philip was further strengthened by the proposed marriage of Barlow's son, Edward, to Philip's niece Joan. This marital arrangement not only solidified their political ties, but also created a familial bond between the two powerful families. The significance of this union lay in the potential for future cooperation and collaboration in various endeavours, ranging from military campaigns to economic ventures. Despite their efforts to secure naval aid from Norway through diplomatic negotiations, their hopes were dashed when Norway refused to provide the assistance they had promised. This setback was a blow to Barlow and Philip's strategic plans, forcing them to reassess their military capabilities and defences. Edward, upon learning of the failed alliance with Norway in 1295, took decisive action to fortify England's northern defences in anticipation of potential threats and incursions. In response to the escalating tensions and the growing uncertainty surrounding their alliances, Edward made key strategic moves by appointing Robert Bruce as the governor of Carlisle and demanding control of crucial Scottish fortresses from Barlow. These actions not only heightened the animosity between the two factions, but also set the stage for further confrontations and conflicts. The gathering of Scottish forces at Caddonlee by March 11th, 1296, under Ballow's command, marked a pivotal moment in the brewing conflict, while some Scottish nobles, like Robert Bruce, Earl of Carrick, chose to abstain from joining the assembly due to lingering resentments and grievances. Others rallied behind Ballow's call to arms, ready to defend their homeland against external threats. The subsequent events unfolded in a series of distinct stages, shaping the course of the First Scottish War of Independence. These stages included the initial English invasion in 1296, the period of resistance spearheaded by iconic figures like William Wallace and Andrew Diora, a resurgence of conflict led by the determined Robert the Bruce, and the ensuing military and diplomatic manoeuvres undertaken by Scotland until the signing of the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328. By 1296, the conflict had escalated dramatically, culminating in Edward I's brutal assault on Ballow, the decisive Scottish defeat at the Battle of Dunbar, and the subsequent abdication of John Ballow. Edward's coercive tactics at the Parliament in Ballow, where he compelled Scottish nobles to acknowledge him as king, effectively subdued Scotland and established English dominance in the region. The year 1297 witnessed a series of rebellions erupting across Scotland, with charismatic leaders such as Wallace and Moray spearheading the resistance against English rule. The turning point came with the decisive Scottish victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which galvanised the Scottish forces and inspired hope for a successful pushback against the English oppressors. This victory not only boosted morale among the Scottish rebels, but also signalled a shift in the power dynamics of the conflict, setting the stage for further confrontations and negotiations in the quest for Scottish independence. Initially, the resistance faced by the Scottish leaders at Irvine was quickly put down. However, the persistent efforts of figures like Wallace and Moray ultimately led to significant triumphs for Scotland. In response, Edward launched retaliatory offensives that culminated in a costly victory at Falkerpost. Wallace's strategic decision to ally with the French against England, along with his diplomatic efforts to secure the release of the imprisoned Scottish King John, took him all the way to the papal court in Rome. Subsequently, the governance of Scotland was assumed by Robert Bruce and John Kin, with William D. Lamberton serving as a mediator starting in 1299. Despite peace attempts in 1302, hostilities resumed, further prolonging the conflict. The capture of Stirling Castle in 1304 marked a turning point in the negotiations between Scotland and England. Even though a majority of Scottish nobles swore allegiance to England after this event, the resistance against English authority persisted following the execution of William Wallace in 1305. Scottish leaders like Bruce and Lamberton continued to uphold internal agreements aimed at reclaiming Scottish independence amidst the intricate political landscape and the reluctant acceptance of English rule. A pivotal moment occurred on February 10th, 1306, when a confrontation between Robert Bruce and John Kin, both claimants to the Scottish crown, took place at Greyfriars Kirk. Bruce's decision to eliminate Kin, who was accused of betraying the Scottish cause to the English monarch, reignited the Scottish resistance. After Bruce uncovered evidence of Kin's treachery, he rallied support and was subsequently crowned as the King of Scots, solidifying his position as a central figure in the fight for Scottish independence. In the midst of daunting obstacles, Bruce resolutely reignited his quest for autonomy in 1307, achieving significant victories that culminated in the critical Battle of Bannockburn in 1308. This historic battle served as a turning point, propelling Bruce to focus on solidifying Scotland's independence in the aftermath. One pivotal moment came with the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, a seminal document that received the formal endorsement of prominent Scottish figures, clergy, and King Robert himself. The declaration emphatically asserted Scotland's sovereign status, underlining the nation's determination to maintain self-rule. Moreover, the tireless efforts of Thomas Randolph bore fruit in 1324, when Pope John formally recognised Robert as the rightful Scottish monarch, further fortifying Scotland's position in the international arena. Despite these advancements, the political landscape in England underwent a transformation with the removal of Edward Tell in 1327 and the accession of Edward III, triggering renewed Scottish incursions into northern England. These hostilities ultimately led to the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328, a landmark agreement that officially acknowledged Scotland's independence and Robert's kingship, thereby bringing an end to the initial phase of the Scottish War for Independence. The signing of the Treaty of Edinburgh not only solidified peace between the two nations, but also set the stage for future diplomatic relations, symbolised by the union between Robert's son, David, and Edward III's sister. This strategic alliance further cemented the bond between England and Scotland. However, the tranquility that followed was short-lived as a fresh conflict erupted in 1331. Edward Balliol, in collusion with Henry Bont, the Earl of Buchan, and other disgruntled Scottish nobles, orchestrated an invasion of Scotland, tacitly supported by Edward III of England. Departing from Yorkshire ports on July the 31st, 1332, Balliol's predominantly English forces landed in Fife, mustering around 2,000 soldiers for their audacious campaign. In the early stages of the conflict between English forces led by John Balliol and the Scottish army under Donald, the Earl of Mara, a significant turning point occurred at the Battle of Duppan Moor. This battle, which took place near Perth, saw Balliol's forces strategically exploit the internal disarray and lack of cohesion within the Scottish ranks, ultimately securing a resounding victory. This triumph paved the way for Balliol's coronation as King of Scotland at Scone on September 24th, 1332. However, despite this initial success, Balliol soon found himself grappling with a series of formidable challenges. The limited domestic support for Balliol's claim to the Scottish throne posed a significant obstacle to his rule from the outset. Moreover, the persistent military threats he faced, particularly highlighted by his defeat at the Battle of Annan on December 16th, further weakened his position. Fleeing to England in a desperate bid for refuge and assistance, Balliol sought the aid of King Edward III. The English monarch, swayed by Balliol's entreaties, departed from his previously neutral stance and officially recognised Balliol as the rightful King of Scotland. This pivotal decision marked a notable shift in English involvement in Scottish affairs, setting the stage for renewed hostilities between the two nations. Despite some reluctance among the English populace to engage in further conflict with Scotland, Edward III's backing of Balliol emboldened the Scots to launch minor incursions into Cumberland. These raids, while limited in impact, provided Edward III with a pretext for his subsequent invasion of Scotland. Edward III's military campaign targeted the strategically important town of Berwick, situated on the Anglo-Scottish border and serving as a crucial trade route for both nations. As Scotland's primary trading hub, Berwick held immense economic significance, deriving substantial revenue from wool duties that formed a key financial of the escalating conflict, underscoring the high stakes involved in the power struggle between Balliol and his adversaries. In his strategic planning, Edward III perceived the potential capture of Berwick as a calculated move to instigate the Scots into a head-on clash, a battle in which he was confident of emerging victorious. Throughout history, direct confrontations were uncommon, as the Scots were renowned for their adeptness in guerrilla warfare tactics and surprise assaults. Thus, the decision of the Scots to abandon Berwick was seen as an unlikely scenario by many historians, given the town's critical role in Scottish trade and economy. The Siege of Berwick unfolded in late March 1333, and it wasn't until May 9th that Edward III himself joined the primary English forces. Despite the formidable defences and ample provisions within Berwick, the English forces intensified their siege, causing significant devastation to the town by late June. This unrelenting pressure forced the defending garrison into a precarious position, ultimately leading to their eventual surrender. Following a truce agreement reached on July the 15th, the Scots were given a deadline of sunset on July 19th to surrender if no reinforcements materialised. Meanwhile, the Scottish army, under the leadership of Sir Archibald Douglas, embarked on a daring incursion into England's northeast region, inciting chaos and disruption. Surprisingly, Edward III chose to turn a blind eye to this development, focusing instead on the ongoing siege of Berwick. Sir Archibald Douglas orchestrated a bold attack aimed at engaging the English forces stationed at Hidden Hill. The Scottish troops encountered arduous terrain as they descended downhill, navigating through marshlands before ascending the northern slopes of the hill. The English archers, positioned advantageously, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing Scots, a harrowing episode vividly chronicled in the Lanarkos Chronicle. Despite suffering significant losses in the initial phases of the battle, the resilient Scottish soldiers pressed on with their uphill assault, enduring a relentless onslaught of arrows from the English ranks. The unwavering determination of the Scots in the face of adversity showcased their valour and steadfast commitment to their cause, highlighting the fierce and enduring spirit that characterised the conflict between the English and Scottish forces during this tumultuous period. In a modern historical account, the English forces, commanded by the formidable spearmen, unexpectedly encountered the strategically positioned Scottish troops, led by seasoned commanders, resulting in a chaotic and devastating conflict. The Scottish ranks, under immense pressure from the relentless English assault, quickly descended into disarray and suffered significant losses as they struggled to hold their ground. The aftermath of the fierce confrontation was nothing short of catastrophic, with thousands of brave soldiers, including the renowned Douglas and 5 other esteemed earls, falling on the battlefield. As the defeated Scots attempted to flee, they were mercilessly pursued and executed by the triumphant English forces, leaving the once bustling battlegrounds eerily silent, save for the groans of the wounded and dying. The grim scene painted a stark picture of the brutal realities of war, and served as a chilling conclusion to the harrowing conflict. The surrender of Berwick to the English marked a turning point in the war, leading to the grim fate of approximately 100 captured Scots, who were swiftly put to death, further solidifying Edward III's decisive victory. The year 1334 saw King Davidton of Scotland seeking refuge in France, while Balliol, facing mounting pressures and internal strife, swore allegiance to Edward III, granting the English significant control over key southeastern Scottish territories. Despite Balliol's efforts to maintain his grip on power, internal discord among his supporters gradually eroded their unity, creating an opening for loyalists of David II to rally behind their exiled king. The lack of a cohesive front among Balol's allies proved to be his downfall, as clandestine French support bolstered Bruce's followers, tipping the scales in favour of David's cause. As Balol struggled to contain dissent and desertions within his own ranks, the winter retreat to Berwick symbolised the diminishing strength of his authority. Both Edward III and Balol engaged in destructive raids, targeting each other's territories with minimal resistance from the weakened Scottish forces. The recurring military setbacks and wavering allegiances among Balol's supporters left him increasingly isolated and vulnerable, teetering on the brink of a precipice as the tides of war turned against him. The prominent pro-Scottish nobles, recognising Balol's weakened state and the internal divisions within his camp, skillfully exploited these vulnerabilities to further diminish his authority and influence. This strategic manoeuvring by the nobles not only undermined Balol, but also set the stage for a significant shift in power dynamics within Scotland. As the Scots found themselves in dire need of military assistance against the English supporters of Balol, they turned to King Philip of France for help. This plea for assistance placed King Philip in a delicate position due to the long-standing historical complexities in the relationship between English monarchs and French kings, dating back to the Norman conquest of 1066. By delving into the historical context, we can see that territorial disputes had significantly reduced English control in France by 1334, with the English retaining only Gascony in southwestern France and Pono in the north. The importance of Gascony's wine revenues to King Edward added a layer of complexity to the political landscape, further highlighting the strategic significance of the region. The enduring alliance between France and Scotland, initially forged in 1299 and reaffirmed in 1326, aimed to counterbalance English influence through collaborative defence strategies. The diplomatic landscape took a new turn in 1331, when Edward III and Philip VI resolved most of their disagreements through a formal treaty, enabling Philip to shift his focus towards planning a crusade to the Holy Land. However, tensions resurfaced in the early months of 1335, when Philip dispatched an envoy to England to address Edward's aggressive stance towards Scotland. This diplomatic move resulted in a temporary ceasefire until mid-1335, giving both sides a brief respite to regroup and strategize. During this lull in hostilities, Edward seized the opportunity to consolidate his financial resources and muster a formidable military force. By the spring of 1335, Edward had assembled the largest army ever seen in a campaign against Scotland, positioning his troops along the Scottish border in a show of strength and readiness for conflict. In contrast, the Scots were grappling with internal divisions among their nobility, leaving them ill-prepared for diplomatic negotiations and military engagements. Edward's forces, employing a scorched earth tactic, swiftly moved through Scottish territories, capturing key strongholds like Perth and setting the stage for a decisive confrontation. The Scots, caught off guard by the swift and decisive English military actions, found themselves in a precarious position as they scrambled to respond to the escalating conflict. The unfolding events underscored the intricate web of alliances, historical rivalries, and strategic calculations that shaped the dynamics of power and conflict in medieval Europe. In the midst of escalating tensions between England and Scotland, the French took a significant stance by deploying a sizable force of 6,000 soldiers to support David II and aid in his reinstatement to the Scottish throne. This move was was just one part of a larger French strategy aimed at challenging English dominance, which also included aggressive naval assaults on English vessels and daring coastal raids. Meanwhile, King Philip II of France proposed that Edward should seek arbitration from Pope Benedict XII to settle the Scottish succession dispute and avoid further conflict between England and France. However, Edward dismissed this suggestion, opting to pursue his own military agenda. As diplomatic efforts faltered, a temporary truce was brokered between Edward and the Scots from mid-October 1335 to May 3rd, 1336. This truce notably excluded forces loyal to Pole, enabling Bruce to consolidate his followers and focus on strengthening his position. The turning point came when Sir Andrew Murray, leading 1,100 loyalists of Bruce, achieved a decisive victory over a larger pro-Palol force at the Battle of Culloon on November 30th. This triumph not only lifted Scottish morale, but also dealt a blow to Balion's reliance on English military support. Amidst these developments, the Pope intervened to urge King Philip to hold off on military actions against England in order to preserve the possibility of a future crusade. By March 1336, Philip successfully persuaded David II to reject a peace treaty proposed by Regent Murray, committing France to the cause of reinstalling David on the Scottish throne. Subsequently, the French began preparations for a major military campaign, mustering a fleet of over 500 ships in Normandy, with plans to launch one army to Scotland and another to Portsmouth. In response to the escalating French threat, Edward focused on bolstering his forces for the impending Scottish expedition and fortifying the English southern coast. English troops were mobilised for aggressive raids into Scotland, intensifying the conflict and setting the stage for a pivotal showdown between the forces of England, France, and Scotland. Upon receiving word of the imminent French invasion, the Scots cleverly avoided direct confrontations with the English forces, instead opting for a scorched earth strategy to hinder the enemy's advancement. This strategic decision forced Edward to swiftly move north to meet up with Palol in Berwick, only to find that the anticipated French reinforcements never materialised. Seizing the opportunity, Edward led a group of 800 men in mid-July to break the siege of Lindores and wreak havoc along the Scottish east coast, showcasing his military prowess. During this time, Sir Andrew Murray adeptly evaded engaging the larger English army in direct combat, opting instead to employ guerrilla tactics and disruptive manoeuvres. The summer of 1336 brought about diplomatic negotiations between an English envoy and the Scottish leaders Philip and David. Despite English overtures, Philip firmly rejected any offers and pledged unwavering military support to David's cause. This alliance resulted in an increase in French privateer attacks on English ships, causing panic and disruption along the southern coast of England. In response to these escalating tensions, Edward III made the decision to return to England in mid-September, where he imposed new war levies and fortified coastal defences in preparation for a potential conflict. Meanwhile, the Scots, under the guidance of Sir Andrew Murray, intensified their guerrilla tactics by targeting and destroying strategic English-held fortifications such as Dunbar, Kinf, and Liston castles to prevent them from falling into Edward's control. As the pressure mounted with famine and disease spreading throughout Scotland, the political and military support from France continued to bolster the Scottish resistance. By the end of 1337, as Edward made his way back to England to confront the French threat, Philip of France was gearing up for an invasion of Gascony, diverting Edward's attention. Exploiting this distraction, loyal supporters of Robert the Bruce led by figures like Sir Andrew Murray and Sir William Douglas, launched daring incursions into English territory, further complicating Edward's military strategy and stretching his forces thin. The English local leaders faced significant challenges in formulating an effective response to the Scottish advances, ultimately leading to Scottish dominance in the north by April and the capture of Galloway on May 24. The situation escalated further when the Grand Council, under Philip's rule, made a proclamation in 1337 asserting that Gascony and Pono should fall under French jurisdiction due to Edward's perceived inadequacies as a ruler. This declaration marked the beginning of the 100 Years' War, a long and tumultuous conflict between England and France. During this period, the Scots continued their incursions into the lowlands, launching raids, besieging Edinburgh Castle, and causing havoc in Cumberland, including a daring assault on Carlisle. Edward tried to reinforce his troops in Scotland, but their impact was limited in the face of the resolute Scottish resistance. In 1338, Edward found himself juggling the defence of the English coastline, the assembly of a continental army, and the deployment of forces to Scotland. The Scots, receiving support from the French, managed to recapture Berwick in 1339, further diminishing English control in the region. By 1340, English influence in Scotland was reduced to a few key fortresses like Stirling, all of which were either under siege or reliant on maritime supply lines for survival. The following year, direct confrontations between England and Scotland diminished, yet internal discord within the Scottish aristocracy persisted. Upon David II's return to Scotland in 1341, he faced challenges in asserting his authority, leading to increased tensions within the kingdom. Despite the adversities faced by the Scots, they gradually pushed back the English forces, achieving significant victories, such as the capture of Stirling and Roxburgh Castle in 1342. These successes ushered in a prolonged period of conflict during David II's reign. In July 1346, Edward III of England launched a major incursion into Normandy with a formidable army, prompting Philip V of France to call upon David II of Scotland to honour their alliance and join forces to invade England, further intensifying the already complex web of alliances and conflicts in the region. Philip's keen observation of northern England's vulnerability prompted David to take swift and decisive action. The initial encounters between Scottish and English forces in the region showcased the resilience of the local defenders. Recognising the need for careful planning, David wisely orchestrated a temporary truce until September 29th to ensure the full mobilisation of his Scottish troops. On October 7th, the Scots executed a meticulously planned invasion of England with a formidable army of around 12,000 soldiers. This force was not only significant in numbers, but also well equipped with sophisticated French weaponry and armour, giving them a technological edge over their opponents. Notably, the Scottish contingent was further bolstered by a group of skilled French knights who had joined them in anticipation of the impending assault. In response to the Scottish incursion, the English authorities strategically exempted the northern counties from contributing troops to the ongoing Normandy campaign, redirecting their focus to the impending threat from the Scots. Under the leadership of William Wallace, Archbishop of York, and Lord Warden of the Marches, along with Ralph Neville, the English swiftly assembled an army of 6,000 to 7,000 men near Durham to confront the Scottish invaders. The climactic clash between the two forces on October 17th initially resulted in a tense standoff that persisted until the afternoon. The English forces then strategically deployed their skilled longbowmen, who engaged in tactical skirmishes to disrupt the Scottish formations. Despite an unsuccessful cavalry charge led by the Earl of Mina in an attempt to dislodge the archers, the English longbowmen managed to goad the main Scottish force into a premature and disorganised assault. The Scottish advance was further impeded by challenging terrain obstacles and a relentless barrage of arrows, ultimately causing chaos within their ranks and hindering their overall effectiveness in the battle. The initial Scottish division faced a rapid and overwhelming defeat, setting the tone for subsequent units led by prominent figures such as the Earl of March and Robert Stewart. These forces crumbled under the relentless pressure from the English troops, forcing them to flee the battlefield in disarray. The English, maintaining a steadfast position, unleashed a continuous barrage of arrows upon the remaining Scottish soldiers, including those under the command of David II. As the English men-at-arms entered the conflict, their fierce combat skills further pushed the Scots into a chaotic retreat. Amidst the turmoil, David II himself suffered grave injuries and was ultimately captured by the English forces, marking a significant turning point in the battle. The victorious English pursued the remnants of the Scottish army throughout the night, inflicting heavy losses and capturing more than 50 barons, effectively decimating Scotland's military leadership and delivering a devastating blow to their forces. Following David II's capture at Neville's Cross, the ambitious Edward Balliol seized the opportunity to capitalise on the English triumph by rallying support for a renewed incursion into Scotland. Despite garnering some backing from southern communities, Balliol's efforts largely faltered within Scotland itself. With the Scottish king imprisoned and a power vacuum emerging, the Scots turned to David's nephew, Robert Stewart, to serve as Lord Guardian and Regent. Stewart, who would later ascend to the throne as Robert II, focused on consolidating his own authority rather than addressing the broader challenges facing the kingdom. However, his credibility was undermined by his perceived abandonment of David II at Neville's Cross, raising doubts about his loyalty and ability to lead effectively in the aftermath of such a significant defeat. In 1348, Edward III employed a strategic approach by proposing to the imprisoned Scottish king, David, that he hold Scotland as a feudal land from England and considered designating Edward or one of his sons as the heir. This move aimed to exert control over Scotland and strengthen English influence in the region. 2 years later, in 1350, Edward modified his offers, suggesting a ransom of £40,000 for David's release, the reinstatement of Balliol, and the appointment of his young son, John of Gaunt, as David's successor in case he had no offspring. These negotiations reflected Edward's intricate political manoeuvres to secure dominance over Scotland. However, the Scottish Parliament, led by Stewart, objected to these terms as they perceived them to be a direct challenge to Stewart's own claim to the Scottish throne. Despite Edward's efforts to broker a favourable agreement, Scottish resistance persisted. Edward, caught up in the ongoing Anglo-French conflict, revisited negotiations in 1354, simplifying his demands in an attempt to find common ground with the Scottish authorities. As tensions escalated along the Anglo-Scottish border in 1355, military preparations intensified, leading to a brief truce that was shattered when the Scots launched a raid into Northumberland and seized Berwick on Tweed. Edward swiftly redirected his forces from France to reclaim Berwick and launch an incursion into southern Scotland in early 1356, resulting in widespread devastation. Balliol eventually renounced his claim to the Scottish throne in January and accepted a pension from Edward signifying a significant shift in power dynamics. The English army pressed forward towards Edinburgh, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake before planning an advance on Perth. However, the harsh Scottish weather conditions disrupted their supply lines, coupled with relentless Scottish harassment, forcing the English forces to retreat to Carlisle. The Scots took advantage of the situation by recapturing 2 English-held castles as the English army disbanded. A fresh truce was brokered in April, offering a temporary respite from the hostilities. The decisive French defeat at the Battle of Berwick in September 1356 had a profound impact on Scottish ambitions, potentially altering the course of future negotiations and power dynamics in the region. The events leading up to and following these military engagements underscore the complex interplay of political intrigue, military strategy, and shifting allegiances during this turbulent period of Anglo-Scottish relations. The defeat suffered by the Scots not only shattered their hopes of achieving their war objectives through French negotiations, but also raised the probability of English forces being redirected to Scotland. As France's support dwindled, the Scots found themselves in a difficult position, leading to negotiations for the release of David's home in exchange for a substantial ransom of around 100,000 marks. This hefty sum was to be paid over a decade in yearly instalments, as stipulated in the Treaty of Berwick. The terms of the treaty were stringent, requiring Scottish nobles to be held as hostages, and forbidding Scottish citizens from taking up arms against Edward III until the full ransom was settled. Consequently, the Treaty of Berwick effectively marked the end of the Second Scottish War of Independence, with Scotland managing to maintain its autonomy, albeit facing ongoing conflicts. Despite Edward II's relatively modest achievements, tensions between Scotland and England persisted over the following 4 decades, erupting into major hostilities in 1400 when Henry IV launched an invasion of Lothian. Upon his return to Scotland, David II was confronted with the arduous task of navigating internal noble conflicts. In 1360, allegations of his extravagant lifestyle fueled a rebellion that he eventually suppressed. Moreover, his wife Joan refused to accompany him back to Scotland in protest against his English mistress from his time in captivity. Reflecting on the repercussions of the ransom treaty on Scotland, it is apparent that while the financial burden was significant, it was overshadowed by the continuous English invasions. David's decision to halt payments after only settling 20,000 marks led to further negotiations that eventually reduced the outstanding debt. This episode underscores the complex and enduring nature of the relationship between Scotland and England during this tumultuous period. This concludes our comprehensive series of educational videos that have examined in depth the historical struggles for Scottish autonomy, both at the onset and in the following stages. Throughout this series, we have explored the rich tapestry of events, individuals, and movements that have shaped the quest for independence in Scotland over the centuries. From the early clashes with English rulers to the later battles for sovereignty, the Scottish people have repeatedly asserted their desire for self-governance and preservation of their unique cultural identity. We have delved into pivotal moments such as the Wars of Independence, the Treaty of Union, and the modern-day independence referendums that have defined Scotland's relationship with the United Kingdom. By shedding light on these complex and nuanced historical narratives, we have gained a deeper understanding of the enduring spirit of autonomy that continues to drive the Scottish people today. Through examining the intricacies of these conflicts, we have seen how they have not only shaped the past, but also continue to influence contemporary debates and discussions surrounding Scottish independence. Thank you you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the wars of Scottish independence. I hope the soothing sounds and stories of bravery and resilience have brought you both relaxation and insight into Scotland's historic struggle for freedom. If you enjoyed this gentle delve into the past, please consider subscribing to the ASMR History channel for more calming historical explorations. Until next time, may you find peace and tranquility in the echoes of history. Sweet dreams.